One of the things I've really missed over the last year or so is hanging out with friends and colleagues and working in dissection labs and various other um, classrooms and teaching rooms and things. So I've had to resort to catching up on Zoom and various other things, and it's been lovely. This is a good example of that. I had a chat with my good friend Gary Carter. Gary is one of these people who is just a student of life and the body and everything. He's done weightlifting, he's a yoga instructor, he's a movement man, he's done incredible drawings. His father is still a world-class athlete into his 70s, 80s. So, Gary is all things the body and loves the dissection lab, and we always have a great time hanging out together. And of course, our Zoom chats can have the capacity to go on as well. But we managed to keep it in time. So this is me and Gary having a chat. Enjoy it.
I'd like to welcome Julian Baker, and this is a co-hosting affair because we didn't know who was going to start this conversation off. So this is going to go backwards and forwards like that.
Usually does anyway. There'll be no sense between the two of us.
And Julian's about to embark on another one of his epic dissections again, which will be online. And I saw the last one online, and it was invaluable. And the thing that I was so envious of is that I wanted to actually be in person with you in that moment, because we have a great time when we're in the lab. We learn so much together, and I just learn a lot off you. I also get to do my own projects with that, and I love that process. And Julian, how did this whole process come about with these projects that you're doing right now online?
A huge adventure to be doing this, and last year the whole thing just changed because, as you know, the last 13 years I've spent in labs around the world dissecting and bringing people in. So that was always my model. And then suddenly, obviously, everything changed last year, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, what am I going to do? So I had all the webinars and all the material that I've got, and all the stuff that we've done together, and so then it was that bringing those webinars, and then me thinking I need to get into a lab, and we found somewhere that was really keen to have us, and off I went. And just unfortunately, with having to spend 2 weeks in transit to get there, I couldn't bring any of the team out there. So I'm hoping that we can get back to some degree of normal in the next year or so and be ending up in a lab together, because I love what you bring to. I love your. I mean, I'm not gonna let you do that project again. Your slings, you're obsessing about the slings, but you bring your ideas that you've drawn, and then you create that those ideas onto a dissection, and painstaking away. And I love the fact you do that. And so, I mean, I wouldn't have the patience or the time to do it, but you plug away at it, and it's great what you end up with.
Yeah, it's been, I mean, to be able to have the time to do that though, which I'm really grateful for, has been, I've had to fight you off sometimes and getting me away from that area, but I'll go back to it. But in the future, other stuff that I've got some of my ideas on, I'd really like to get my head into again. Because we were talking before, and just the preamble before we did this was, what is it that is of benefit to me as a manual therapist and movement practitioner?
I mean, that was what I was going to ask you, and because I was looking at those pictures of the slings and the drawings and stuff you'd done, and I wondered how you managed to incorporate that, taking it from the idea of your head into a drawing, then into a dissection, and sort of seeing that those structures are possible, whether you managed to incorporate that into the way that you teach movement, or think about movement in a practical way.
I think what's happened with that is that the movement stuff came first, and then there's an understanding of the feeling. And from the feeling of the movement, the question goes, well, I wonder if there's this going on. And then I look into anatomy books, and, because as you know,
not there.
No, they're not there. But, myofascially oriented in looking at certain directions of tissues. At some point, when you look at loads of anatomy books enough, you will see certain directions. And if they've been drawn by so many different people over so many different years, that there's obviously something that's going to be there continuously. So then to go under the skin and start to look at it, but to look at it and I'll use the terms that you use, with an honest dissection, it actually brings about the form in front of our eyes when we're doing the work. And all of a sudden it kind of led me to, well, yeah, there is something here, and I think it's got a kind of behavior to it. And then that helped me understand not only movement, but the whole process of getting towards those tissues first. And something I've always said about you is that you've left us hanging on in the skin and the superficial fascia for so long, is that the palpatory sense of understanding those areas, I think, is even more important than getting to the stuff underneath.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is that whenever we, you know, when we see a model, and you know, those slings and whatever we cut out or carve out as far as the muscle is concerned, it's always a model, tend to be not considered in relation to the function, the strain, the loading, the distribution of the things like the skin and superficial fascia, which are functional and part of that loading and strain. So, you know, there's still that danger that we have, where we go, right, here's a sling, here's our feeling, here's our movement, and we still sort of create these parts of the body that, you know, so I've really banged on about trying not to get too focused in onto those parts, and to say, right, yeah, that's great, there's a model, but now let's bring it back into the whole structure and the whole system, and consider it that way. Otherwise we just go down that route of anatomy that anatomy's done, as systemizing the body in a way that you can't then, you know, you can't then put back together.
Yeah, when we did some of those sessions in Northampton, was it Northampton? Nottingham. We were, you know, when I had one of my groups with you, one thing that I was constantly reminding the students of is that even though they were kind of getting, they wanted to see a certain area, let's say the classic thing is someone wants to go and see the psoas, is that the fact that you've got to keep remembering what you're removing, because all the stuff that you're touching and removing is kind of part of what you're getting to anyway. You can't just remove all of that and then say there's a psoas there. It's interlinked with so many other things, and that is so invaluable for anyone that ever does one of these courses. And I think you display it so well, even when you do it on camera, and it's still Julian Baker in the room with you. That's the great thing about it. You haven't changed your narrative, you haven't changed your behavior in front of the camera. You become more, in fact.
Well, as you know, I'm pretty, you know, camera doesn't bother me. I'm quite happy to stand in front of a camera or 5,000 people and talk. You know, it's whether it's a skill or an acquired skill, or I'm not sure. I mean, I always remember, I found that video somewhere of you in front of I was trying to get, when we were doing our class together, I was trying to get Gary to film a little video, and I turned the camera on, I go, let's go, and he go, it was like a rabbit in the headlights.
Like Peter and Dudley Moore, the two of us. Remember, I just kept on.
We said 2 hours of just talking absolute rubbish. It was great, but yeah. So I think that's the thing, is that I find that what's helpful is if I have people in the lab that I can talk to, and I did a lot of stuff last year where I was on my own in the lab. I spent hours at night, you know, dissecting, and I found it hard to explain what I was seeing or what I was doing, because I didn't have that audience, if you like, to bounce off. And that's really what I thrive on, is having people to ask you questions, and then it gives me a narrative to follow, and it helps me to be able to explain it in a way that other people understand it, rather than what I understand. And often when I'm doing that, you know, what's coming out of my mouth it's the first time I've heard it. So, you know, that's what's interesting. But I'm going to go back to the question and say, so what have you been in a situation where you've been teaching, and you because of the dissection that you've done or you've seen, because a lot of people will go, oh well, you know, dissection, it's just dead people, what are you going to learn from that? So I want to understand from my perspective how you've incorporated that into better teaching, or helping other people to understand, or, you know, the defining the benefit, if you like.
Okay, so something that's really been beneficial with that is the soft fix that you've been working with.
Yeah.
Soft fix, when an area is moving, it's moving with a lot of pliability, so that when a limb is moving, you can see the transference of those tissues move further on up the structure. Yeah. Where a usual fix, you don't see the transference as well.
So just gonna explain that, really, if anybody's watching that we're talking about, you know, dissection of obviously dead people, and there's a couple of ways around that. So very briefly, the traditional way, if you go into a medical school, is to use a lot of formaldehyde and formalin, and you get these very grey, very stiff cadavers. That the skin is like cardboard, and all the nerves and everything are sort of very hydrated, and of course dehydrated, and they've been sometimes around for 2 or 3 years, and that's generally speaking what, to this day, what most medical students will learn their anatomy on, and anatomists will teach on. And then you've got, at the other end of the scale, you've got the holy grail that people refer to, which is the fresh, the tissue. And you know, they say, oh, fresh is best, and that's Tom's model. Personally, I've done on both. Fresh, you've got a very narrow window of opportunity. You've got 4 days, sometimes even 3, and you've got something which is falling apart. It liquefies effectively, and so the muscle is floppy, and it's turning to liquid, and of course there's some pretty unpleasant smells coming out of it. And in the middle ground, there's a new recipe, if you like, for embalming that Ben Whitworth from Dodge has come up with, which uses slightly different chemicals, which fixes the body so that it's very mobile. I say fixes, it means it's not decaying or decomposing. You can have it there for 6 or 8 months, and it's very lightly embalmed, and so you get all this movement, and the skin is soft, and you can see the joints movement, the connective tissue movement. So it's very much a middle ground, and we get to see how those connective tissues move around in the skin. So that was just an explanation for if you're watching about soft fixes, but it certainly transformed the way that we can see movement in those tissues.
Yeah, so we get a, you know, it gives us the opportunity to peek under the skin, see how the tissues are moving and transferring the forces much further than you would see in a usual fix. So that, for me, it helps the eyes when I'm looking at someone moving, and it allows my eyes to spread further when I'm looking at the whole body. But also, you know, there's that ability to look locally and globally almost at the same time, and understand how the structure's functioning, and it kind of gives you a slight 3D sense of being able to see under the skin when you're looking at someone. You know, of course, still some of it's going to be guesswork because everyone's anatomy is a little different to the next person, but it really helps to bring the whole process into 3D, especially for a manual therapist, because the touch relationships change so much. And I think with the soft fix, it brings a kind of a realer quality to the feel under the hands, and our textural relationships, you know, this idea of layers. And I still go with the fact that there are going to be some layers there. You know, the strata is different. The strata is different from one region to the next, but not layers that you can just peel. You know, they connect, as you know, from top to bottom, but the strata organizes itself differently, which generates different qualities of movement, and the fingers can feel for that. And we don't have to go.
It's like refraction. If you put, you know, you drop something into water, it doesn't go straight down. It travels. There's a distance. And so the same thing when you apply pressure or force to an external tissue, it doesn't go directly through. It's going to have to, you know, transfer and take that force loading in different directions through the tissues down towards the sort of the target that you're getting to. So you know, yeah, there's that. And in terms of manual therapists, what's very revealing is that when you take away the skin and the superficial fascia, that adipose layer, and you get people to palpate that deep fascia stroke muscle layer, then I don't know what that is. I have no recognition of those tissues. And it's only really when you put the skin and superficial fascia back that you get the recognition of what you're touching, because our reference for our touch isn't muscle or fascia or bone. Our reference is going through. If you've always touched the world through, you know, a duvet, then you will not recognize what the world feels like if you take the duvet away initially.
Yeah, when I have the odd student say, well, you know, I'm working on this region of the leg and I'm touching this muscle, I say, well, the reference for that is, imagine you've laid a yoga mat over that person, and then you're working through the yoga mat, you know, because you're referencing those tissues. What it has helped is that even the spread of the hand on the tissue changes to pick up that transference of loads, you know, so you can feel more of the spread. And it's been, you know, it's invaluable for that, I think. And the hands become more sensitive to the surface they touch, and you don't have to go too deep. You can actually work so much more efficiently by being lighter.
Yeah, touch is touch. Once it creates enough of a electrical change in the cell membrane, then that's it. You've got a transference of energy through, you know, what's called an action potential. The other thing about that layer, though, Gary, is that a lot of people, you know, don't realize or forget that this is the starting point for a lot of dysfunctions, particularly in movement. That if you've got the skin and the superficial fascia, they're not separate layers, as we've said. So you've got the fibers that go through the adipose layer that hold those adipose cells in sight and that then join up with the deep fascia. Now, if you cut through those layers in surgery, or you injure them, or you somehow restrict them, then it's this superficial layer that's starting the process of restriction, rather than necessarily the deep layers. We all want to go and release muscle and fascia, but quite often, in terms of like, well, you know, I've pinned this down, I can't now lift my shoulder. The pinning isn't coming from a muscular perspective or a bone perspective. It's coming from that superficial scarring or injury or inflammation or whatever it happens to be. And I think we tend to forget that actually a lot of that ability to change our movement is based a lot more close to the surface than we realize.
Yeah, I mean, when I started studying shiatsu in the early 90s, there was always it's a profound process because you don't have to go very deep anyway. So
Yeah.
the shiatsu work is an open hand onto the surface.
Yeah.
From me experiencing it and also giving it, you know, individuals would find that they have a greater range of motion. And it's only then when, you know, many years later, I got into a lab and then looking under the skin, but
Yeah.
looking at the skin and the superficial fascia tetherings, that started to, it just kind of confirmed what I'd been understanding with my hands, but I had no language for it at the time. And I think it really, it clarifies language. It really helps things to become clearer in your mind.
It does. I mean, I think for me, for you know, best part of 10 or 11 years, my model was Gil's model, you know, Gil Headley's model. And so, you know, the focus on things like the filmy fascia, this sort of layer that's left behind on the deep fascia, you know, what is it, what's in it, you know, trying to think about the epithelium in it and all that kind of stuff. And it's only really in the last couple of years I realized, well, it's not there. It's a remnant of the fibers that are left behind when you cut away the superficial fascia. The same thing goes to the circles on the underside of the skin. You know, we've been assessing about those circles. Well, the circles are the artifact of what happens. You got a fiber that goes through, a spiral fiber that goes up from the adipose layer that holds the adipocytes in place, and it attaches to the skin. Now, when you cut that away, that little column, if you like, you're like looking down at the center of a toilet roll, that's been cut away and those circles are left behind. So they're the attachment sites of the collagen fibers from superficial fascia. There's no mystery to them. So
exactly. It does show you how well the skin is connected to that other structure, because, you know, they're one and the same, just a different strata on top.
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting about that, though, and it's something I'd like to discover really, and I think I've talked to you about this, is in as much as so fat cells, I don't know if you know this, I'm pretty sure you must know, but fat cells don't proliferate. You don't get more fat cells, they just get bigger, you know, so they expand. And they have to expand rapidly, because if, you know, we go out on the lash and we drink, you know, 6 pints and eat 12 donuts, and we've got to get that sugar out from our system. We've got to stick it somewhere, and there's only so many places we can stick it. And the fat cells are ready to accept that energy very quickly. But of course, as they expand, they have to have the housing that holds them in place. And collagen is the housing that holds it in place, but it develops too slowly for there to be more collagen to lay down. So how does somebody get fatter very quickly without the collagen splitting? Well, I think it unwinds quite quickly. And I think, and you'll understand this having been down the gyms and you've seen people that get rapid weight gain or rapid weight loss, and you get these stretch marks. And I think that's what those stretch marks are. I think they're a rapid unwinding and effectively a scarring, a speedy unwinding, a quick lay down of different types of collagen around the skin to allow for this expansion of the skin, but also to allow for this unwinding of the collagen within the adipose tissue. So it's just a thought. But interesting enough, all the people I ask, all the biochemists and the biologists all say, the biologists say, go and ask the biochemist, the biochemists go and say, ask the biologist. So we're not really sure about what goes on with it.
One thing that I'd always seen in some of the gyms when I was working with competitive bodybuilders is that their process to growth and their process to reducing the fat around the body and the fluids was a process that took a long time. So the skin would move equally with the movement.
Yeah.
But some people lose the weight too quickly. The skin hasn't been able to move back with it. So a lot of the sort of intelligent with the way that they're training and they diet, what you notice is the skin's kind of drawn back, and it actually has got a good youthful, tight look to it. But the ones that have just done these things too rapidly, it hasn't quite got the same consistency to it.
I was talking to Robert about this, and he went, and I said, you know, this is fascinating. Yeah, this is so interesting. Yeah, Robert's like, and I said, you know, what do you think is the? And he said, I agrees with this. You know, it's that rapid weight loss where the adipose cells, again, they're remember again that they're just shrinking and expanding. They're not, you know, getting less of them unless you cut them away, in which case they're going to get replaced. But they're shrinking. So if they shrink quickly, then there's this sort of, you know, floppy telephone wire that's left around, and no adipose cells to fill it. So they've got to respond slowly. So fascia, wherever it may be, collagen responds slowly. It doesn't respond quickly like muscle and nerve does. So probably if you were to ask me, I'm going to guess that the sort of 2 pounds to 3 pounds a week, you know, kilo to 2 kilo a week weight loss would be the optimal to avoid, you know, any kind of that kind of response, because it's going to give that time for those collagen fibers to wind themselves back up again.
That's definitely the timing in the process. So, you know, it's got its own timing, and if we try to override that timing, we end up causing all sorts of issues there, I think.
Yeah, and of course, you know, you end up with a lot of the dehydration issues as well, where people are sort of, you know, fasting and you get those changes in skin tone, and that's a different ballgame entirely. But certainly that actual weight loss is a reconfiguration of you know, what our energy expenditure is and does around the body. But we're getting away from dissection, Gary.
Yeah, but that will happen naturally in a natural environment. I've got about 5 minutes, Julian. So Julian, you're going deeper, aren't you, this time? Because before you were quite superficial.
Yeah, well, yes, no. I mean, last year it was just that case that we had 6 days, sort of 2.5 hours. We go out at 7 o'clock of an evening, and so it went live. But everything's been recorded from last year. So we did all the skin, superficial fascia. So it's all there. It's already on that in that content. So this year, what I want to do is I want to cover all the stuff that we didn't cover last year in terms of the 6 days. I've got an incredible setup, so I can do picture in picture. I've invested heavily in cameras and broadcasting stuff. You haven't seen my setup, but it's amazing. So we're going to cover and go over all the things we didn't do last year. For the first week, we're going to get into the shoulder joint capsule a bit more, into the hips, so that's our first 6 days. And then the second 6 days, we're going to go into the pelvic floor. We're going to get into the spinal cord, the deep lumbar structures, the thoracolumbar structures, and the erector spines, the thoracics, and the heart. You know, we talk about the heart. We could spend hours studying the heart, but that's not really what my job is. I'm not an anatomist as such. What I want to show is this is the heart. These are the chambers of the heart, but these are the tissues that connect up to it, and this is the effect of it, and this is what the relationships are. So, you know, if you want to go and study the heart, then you know, the theoretical side of things, there's loads of resources out there, but I want to show more about the stuff that's not shown, the stuff that's going to affect the manual and movement therapist in terms of, well, this is what the direct connective tissue to your heart, your pericardium, your diaphragm, and so on and so forth is. So that's really what I'm doing the second week. I want to get into the brain and have a little look at the spinal cord, the duras of it, look at the fluid that's going through there, look at the thickness of the skull, stuff that we can really, you know, get not hands-on, because obviously you can't see it, but something we can get really practical on it. So the next time somebody says, oh, you know, I'm feeling this underneath my hands, you can decide whether that's biologically plausible or not. So yeah, that's the layout.
And what are the dates of these? When's it going?
Well, we go live on April the 12th. So we go 6 days from April the 12th, and that's going to go out 7 p.m. UK time. We're going to make sure, because clocks go forward soon, 7 p.m. UK time, and then we go out for the second week, which is going to be so 12th to the 19th, I think it is, so the 21st to 24th or something like that. So it's the second 2 weeks in April, but everything's recorded. So, you know, when people join in for that, immediately the moment I press stop, those get put straight back onto that page, and they're available forever. I'm not going to keep, you know, it's a lot to take in, and people need to revisit it. And as their experience changes and their understanding changes, they're want to go back and see it differently. And so I'm making it so that, you know, if you purchase, you know, but the whole lot, including last year, I think is 350 quid. But we'll give you a coupon to anybody that's watching this. But but if you had the whole lot, that's 350 quid. But for the two for this year, it's 150 each, or 225 the two. But they're available forever. So, you know, that's it. Once you get your log on for that, you can go back as many times as you want, as often as you want, and you can watch it, so that you know.
It's functionalanatomy.com.
Functionalanatomy.com. I still when I'm talking to people, as far as the yoga and the movements, I know what you're into, and you're not your classical yoga thing, but it's like, I wanted to emphasize about what you were saying about being able to see movement differently, you know, particularly in the stuff that we talk about, like linear, where there isn't anything linear in a movement. It's about going into a movement, coming out of a movement, rather than the actual movement itself.
Yeah. So, well, what we tend to notice also is that any movement towards and away from has got rotation in it. There's, you know, and that's the one thing that you can see when you get under the skin. There's a quote by Vanda Scaravelli, who was the matriarch behind my work, and she had a saying, is going with the body and not against it. And when I got skin for the first time, you see a landscape of shape. And then I realized, yes, going with the body and not against it. If I go with it, I'm not going to end up in trouble. If I go against it, I've got a whole world of trouble coming up.
Yeah.
Seeing it under the skin, it really helps you understand the feel of these slight rotational and oscillatory movements. And it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I always say there's no straight lines in nature, and you know, you watch anything grow, it's growing in a spiral. And I was in one of the national parks in the States a couple of years ago, and it was interesting having watched the trees fall down. You know, we think of the tree being cut, but actually when you see them falling, they've fallen on a twist. They've sort of fallen naturally, and they've twisted, and you see this green stick fractures. You know, this incredible twisting and snapping that's happened as a result of them falling. They don't fall straight down. Cool.
You know, actually, you watch a child fall down, or someone that's strong, because they tend to spiral when they fall. It's only someone that's trying to resist falling, fall down straight, and then you see injuries happen there.
Yeah, and I think that's the nature of that of that sort of crumpling. You know, you see something just they collapse and they go straight down. Although I did watch a guy fall from the top step of a pub once. He just went wham, and down he went, you know, flat out. I think he was unconscious before he got there. But yeah, so there's that natural straight line, that natural twist that we all see in movement. Tom uses a very famous picture of this kid walking and the spirals involved in that. You know, so interesting stuff. You know, what I want to do is I want to see. I know your time. I want to see one of these days to record somebody through their life, and then we're going to dissect them. And I think it's going to be you, Gary.
Well, unless I beat you to it.
Okay, it's a deal. Mate, I hope that we can be together in a lab with our brains together, our heads together, and a beer afterwards in the not too distant future. I've missed you so much through all this, and the team that we have around us. So I really hope that we can sort that out soon.
We'll make that happen at some point. But good luck with this project next time. Okay. See you soon.
Thanks, Gary. Lovely to see you. Take care now.
Okay, dude. If you